Good morning, everybody. It's Jay. I'm not working today. I have to go to a doctor's appointment. Do an ultrasound. Got some weird fatty tissue on my right side. It's been there for about a year, maybe. So, gonna take care of that. Hopefully it's nothing major. Hopefully it's really just fatty tissue that can go away. But we'll find out. Anyways, that's not why I'm doing the video. Why I'm doing the video is I was just thinking about I was watching The Irishman a few months back. Good movie. Hadn't seen it until then. And Robert De Niro playing an Irishman instead of or an American of Irish descent who speaks Italian because he went to Italy and fought in the war in Italy and then he works for all these Italian mob bosses and things like that. Very interesting movie, by the way. Very, very interesting. And that could be what really happened in terms of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa and all that. But, De Niro. Anyways, it's like the wife of Joe Pesci's character. I think it was Joe Pesci's character. It's like she's a beautiful Italian woman and like she thinks she's royalty because they came to America on a particular boat. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you think of royalties, you came on a specific boat. You're a bunch of poor Italians. What are you talking about, right? What's going on, right? I mean, nothing wrong with being Italian or being poor or coming to America as a poor Italian on a boat. But I'm just thinking, like, what's the big deal, right? And then I thought to myself, oh, wait a second, but what about the Mayflower? And I thought, yeah, the Mayflower is a bunch of, like, poor English and Dutch trying to escape religious persecution and probably, some economic issues as well. And that whole story became part of the American legend, the national legend of the American nation. Now, if you think about it, every nation has its own national legend. And maybe for some Italian-American families, part of their national legend was coming on a particular boat. Maybe there's groups of Italians that came on that same boat, and their families are like, yeah, we came on that, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm not Italian. I had a girlfriend once that was of some Sicilian ancestry. Her grandfather had come from America. Like, he was born en route from Sicily. So, and they were, as all Sicilian families are in some form or fashion, connected to the mafia, She wasn't, her mom wasn't, but her mom's dad was. Kind of. Not immediately, but like his mother had been married off to a mob guy. Anyways, I think about different legends, like the Muskogee Nation has its own national legend, or many legends that kind of build up the kind of like prehistory of the Muskogee people prior to Europeans showing up. So, we have our legend about the clans and the mist covering the earth and things like that, and the caves. Like, that's all the same legend. And that's the national legend that told us about the clans. There's actually a written national legend of the Chattahoochee people, which apparently was written on a piece of buffalo hide that was given to the Royal Archives of England or something. And it's interesting. If I find it, I think it's on my bookshelf. If I find it, I should read it to you guys because it's very interesting. And I know that the living tradition and also subsequent written versions of the legends, like maybe what Swanton wrote down, might differ in certain details. And then you got, of course, Milford's memoir. His version of things also is going to differ from all the others to a certain extent, while containing many of the same elements. But these legends kind of tell us about who we are and where we come from. And the thing is, I'm one of those guys that believes that mythology actually has more truth to it than fiction in some respects. I don't know if the Hydra was real, but or if certain aspects of the Argonautica, Jason the Argonauts. But I think there was an Argo. I think that Jason was probably a real person, and I think that there was some journey these guys all went on. I know that some historians will say, oh, well, the events happened, but not under the same names. And I'm thinking, why not? Why wouldn't it be a guy named Jason? Why wouldn't the boat be called the Argo? Why wouldn't his buddies be called the Argonauts, right? So I tend to look at it more like, yeah, he probably was real, the boat was real, the legend was real to an extent, but not necessarily all the supernatural elements. But then again, I don't know. I mean, look, I think Cuchulainn was real. I love the Irish legends. I think Finn McCool was real. I think that, yeah, man, I mean, you know, there's a lot of national legends. Like, for example, among the Irish race, and of course, by extension, the Scots, you have the Milesian race that showed up in Ireland after the Tuatha Dé Danann were already there. And the Tuatha Dé Danann showed up, I believe, after the Firbolgs and the Numidians and Partholon's colony. There's one colony that didn't leave any people behind. Like, they just, like, showed up and then, like, that was it. They left. Yeah, the Picts that showed up, but then, the Irish said, no, go over to Alba, Scotland. And yeah, you can take some wives, but then your lineage has to be reckoned after the female lineage. They didn't think much of the Picts. So they wanted, like, the lineage to go after the female line because even though the Irish were completely patrilineal, they saw their own bloodline as being superior to that of the Picts. But they also didn't want to leave these poor people with, like, no seed because they didn't bring wives with them, right? It's kind of like certain tribal towns. I mentioned in one of the previous videos about the tribal town, one of the Yuchi towns where it's like a bunch of Yuchi men took Muskogee women and then they started their own town. And it's a Yuchi town, but at the same time, it's like the women are Muskogee, so the children all have Muskogee clans, and therefore, like, what happens is, like, how Yuchi really is it after a while? Like, they know they're of Yuchi descent, but it's like, if the Yuchi language isn't the main thing, and Muskogee has become the main language, probably, at that ceremonial grounds, then, I mean, there's Muskogee as any other town at that point. It's just that in the Yuchi tradition, they went through more of a patrilineal, like the chieftain was passed from father to son. So every nation has its own legends, it has its own, like, customs. And I think, like, about the American, nation and the United States of America, and it's like we have a bunch of legends. We have, like, there's this one girl that, like, the first girl born from the Puritans or whatever. Like, you have these different people that were, like, very, like, important figures because they were the start of what would later become the American colonies, which would then later on become the United States. At the same time, unlike with some of the other legends that I've mentioned, the American story, the American legend has facts to back it up, like facts as in, like, documents from the time period and things like that. Nevertheless, we kind of spin it a certain way. We might look at it a certain way and say, oh yeah, well, it happened this way when it actually happened a little bit, like, slightly different, So part of our legend is that George Washington is like the father of our country, and that is technically the truth, right? He was the first president. He definitely led the American armies, and ultimately, finally to victory. Not on his own entirely. He had others with him, but to whom he delegated leadership to. But he was the guy in charge. So, yeah, I mean, we have used the founding fathers, we put them in a very idyllic way, or we tend to take them into a more, they owned slaves, they're a bunch of evil racists, slave-owning, rapists, blah, 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 blah. And like a lot of this stuff isn't true. And when they did own slaves, it wasn't quite as dark as people paint it. What I mean by that is a lot of people inherited slaves. And I guess after listening to Thomas Sowell talk about through using factual documents to back it up, when he explained the slavery situation, it's like a lot of these guys, they couldn't just get rid of their slaves. It actually, in some cases, would not have been better for them. Like, the world that they were in would not have been ready to accept that many freed people of color. It just wasn't feasible at the time. So, it was really, like, you have one guy who complained about, like, slavery, but then he owned a bunch of slaves. But it wasn't Thomas Jefferson. It was somebody else. I forgot his name. Hold on a second. Give me a second here. I might remember. Randolph. He had no kids. He actually freed all the slaves upon his death. But it was something like he tried to find ways of creating a colony for freed people of color in the North, and they're like, no, we don't want that. But you tend to think, oh, well, the abolitionists were the good guys, and the Southerners were evil. It's like, well, the Northerners weren't always that great either, and the Southerners were not always as bad as they get painted out to be. But some of them were. So it's a much more complex issue. The issue of slavery is very, very complex. And when it comes to the founding fathers, it was very, very complex. And the time that they were in, they knew that it was evil. They knew it had to end. But there was just no way of abolishing slavery at that time. In a manner that would have been effective, that would have actually benefited the slaves themselves, as well as everybody around, but definitely wouldn't have benefited the slaves in some respects. Like, it was a much more complex issue at that time. That's why people were talking about sending them to Liberia, and they did create Liberia, and freed slaves did go to Liberia, and that's why their flag is the same as ours, but with 1 star instead of 13 or 50. So, because they're one state. So, yeah, it's really interesting to look at that. It's very, like, Thomas Sowell kind of like blew my mind when I saw his, and this is a very educated black dude who's very, like, he cuts against the grain when it comes to a lot of, like, black historians. Because, I mean, he's extremely educated. He's very objective about what's going on. He does some interesting things. He talks about, like, certain people that are, like, lazy in the New World that were white are basically descended from the same lazy people that were white from, like, England and in certain parts of Scotland. He doesn't pull his punches. This guy's like, I mean, he's something else. So, anyways, so he's not like a black white supremacist or some, you know, like people try to claim Larry Elder was. It's just totally stupid. But yeah, you have legends that get created, and anyways, getting back on point here, legends that get created that kind of tie a group together socially. And so the legend of the Muskogee people, you have the clans, you have all these events that took place, and then you have some towns that sort of got adopted. Like, you have either through conquest or through just adoption. We've acquired towns that now have enough of our blood anyway. They're Muskogee people now. It's like the Uchis and Creek Nation. Well, they're all Muskogee people too by blood. Like, and mostly by matrilineal descent. They're as Creek as anybody else who would traditionally be considered Creek. So, like, I don't even know what the Uchi clans would have been before they started marrying Muskogee women. Like, I have no idea. The language exists, but it almost died, and they're bringing it back. But it's like, I don't know what clans they have, and if they have a Deer clan, would it be the same as the Deer clan among the Muskogee people? Well, if it is, then it's because they took Muskogee women, not because it pre-existing was the case. Because they're a language isolate. Their language isn't related to anybody else's. They, I believe, worship the sun. That's why the name means children of the sun. But yeah, like all the different tribes, all the different nations, not just Indian nations, but all nations across the world have some kind of national legend, and some have more facts to back them up. We don't have the names of all of our ancient ancestors in the tribe. Okay, like we don't have the names of all the people that had founded the original, like, prehistory of our people. So trying to tie it together becomes more difficult. That's why people take archaeological evidence and say, okay, this is part of the history of our people. Some say, well, no, that's just, how do we know that the mound builders are really the ancestors? People mostly assume that's the case. It probably is the case, at least to an extent. It's kind of like the Uchi really do have Uchi blood, but they also have a lot of Muskogee blood now, right? But they still identify as being Uchi because that's, that is their identity. So, and it is their bloodline. So, I don't know. It's interesting. There's no pure race, and never really has been. And the idea of a full blood of any race is a myth. So, and if you look at the ancient legends, again, you look back at the ancient legends of the Scots and the Irish, going back to, like, the Scythians, and how they went to Egypt, and, like, one of them married the daughter of the Pharaoh. And then that would mean that all the royal family of the Scots and Irish, which by extension would be every royal house in Europe at this point, because they all have some lineage back to the King of England, who has ancestry back to the Kings of Scots, which has ancestry back to the High Kings of Ireland. If that legend were true, then they all have a little bit of Egyptian blood through the royal lineage. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But then they say her name was Scotia. And it's like, okay, and that's like how the Scots got their name, is they had decided to use the name Scotia. But it's like so far back, it's like, yeah, I don't know if I totally believe that, but you never know. I mean, look, did the Welsh really descend from the Trojans? Is any of that true? I mean, maybe not. They don't look exactly the same as all the other Celts. They're more swarthy complected, the Romans made note of. So it's like, they weren't these blonde-haired, blue-eyed, red-headed people, or blonde-haired people. They were swarthy with darker hair usually. So, of course, that might reflect the Mediterranean look, but at the same time, what did the Trojans actually look like? The Greeks were not exactly as dark as a lot of modern Greeks are. Of course, I have a buddy who's Greek who's like very, very white. If you look at Agamemnon had red hair. Achilles was blonde. Alexander the Great might have been redheaded. Cleopatra might have been redheaded. So, I mean, you've got people have these very weird ideas about history because, this person lived there and now people look this way today, so they must have looked that way back then. It's like, no, that's really not the case. This is where historical artwork and skeletal remains and things like that tell you more about the actual history of a place and people. So yeah, it's all interesting stuff though. But national legends, I was just kind of thinking about that because I think that national legends are important. They tie us together. We as the American nation need to believe the founding fathers were not just a bunch of evil, racist, white supremacist, slave-owning, just evil people. Like, we have to believe that these guys, at least for the most part, were good people that had good intentions. Maybe they didn't all have the same ideas about how to do things. Like John Adams, some of his ideas were bad, some of his ideas were good, and some of the good ideas made it into the our founding documents and the way our government continued on. Some of Thomas Jefferson's ideas were good. Some of them may not have been good. Some of what he did at times was not good. Same with George Washington. Okay. But if we just look at it and say, oh no, because this guy owned a slave, even if he inherited them, even if he wasn't like trying to breed them to do chattel slavery, even if he thought that stuff was wrong, but just simply inherited slaves, because he had them, he was bad. It's like Ulysses S. Grant. He owned a slave that he literally inherited, and he freed the slave, but because he had at any point in time owned one through inheritance, he is an evil person forever. We have to rip down his statues. It's like, that is the dumbest crap ever. There's some woman from the Wiyot tribe who was on Tucker Carlson recently. I saw this clip and it's like she wanted to tear down the statue of this guy. Was it McKinley or some guy? I think it was McKinley, who never persecuted her tribe and who actually was in the Union Army in the Civil War helping to free slaves. Her tribe had been made slaves at one point, and at that location there had been slaves that had been sold off of her people. But it's like she goes off and it's like, oh, but because he was part of Western civilization, and because of that, it's offensive to us. We're going to create healing by getting rid of the statue of him who did us no wrong. He did no wrong to any of us, but because, he's part of the culture that ultimately spawned what caused the bad things to happen. It's like, no, don't be stupid. He did nothing wrong to you. So don't tear a statue down. Build another statue nearby that shows that your people becoming free again, right? Do something cool like that, and then you have this bigger tapestry of history that actually not only includes this good guy, right? Presuming he was a good guy, but also build a monument to your people too, right? And then there's this bigger tapestry of history that's awesome, and you can share that for future generations, unless, Antifa or BLM tear it down, okay? And that's what we really need to avoid is like, and I mean, the idea of legally tearing something down is one thing, but I'm still not for it. I still think you need to leave the monuments up there. Build another monument nearby that contradicts that monument, okay? Do something funny like that. So that way people have, there's an opposing opinion right next to that opinion. Okay. Like that's my take on it. Okay. But it's like tearing down the Abe Lincoln statue because the slaves that were freed, look up to him in reverence. Well, it's the descendants of slaves that he had freed that built the statue. They paid for it. And like Antifa wanted to, BLM and Antifa wanted to tear it down. It's like, no, it's Abe Lincoln. What are you thinking? So it's like, on some level, we need to believe that Abe Lincoln freed the slaves with good intent. The reality is there's an Article 13 amendment, not Article 13, sorry, a proposed 13th amendment, I believe it was a proposed 13th amendment that would have allowed the slaves, the South to own slaves in perpetuity constitutionally. And that was his original, like, hey, we'll give this concession to keep the Union intact. He actually cared more about the Union being intact than he did about the issue of slavery initially. I think as the war went on and as he was losing, he realized, oh, you know what? As a nation, we've sinned by having slaves. We need to repent. And ultimately he came to a different conclusion. He might even have read the Book of Mormon. Like, he actually checked out a copy of the Book of Mormon and held on to it for some time. And if you look at that, it's like, that's a good enough reason to be anti-slavery. Read the book and you'll see that, like, slavery, being in bondage, it's all a bad thing. Okay. So it's like, I think that there's a lot of national legends that have fact behind them. And I think there's some that are maybe not be as factual, but there's still some facts behind it. Maybe we overly idealize our heroes, but sometimes maybe that perspective is merited. In any case, for a nation to maintain itself, to maintain its identity, for a group of people to maintain their identity, they have to have a national legend. It has to exist. For Christians to be Christians, you have to believe that Jesus Christ is divine. You have to believe that he is the Son of God, that he died for our sins, and that he rose from the dead. All those things are requisite. Oh, and that he will raise us from the dead. Okay? All these things have to exist within our identity as Christians for our Christianity to have any meaning to it. If you relegate him, if you become a relativist and just relegate his existence to, he was a good man and a teacher and he wanted us to help people, and you take out all the intricacies of what he actually talked about, then you end up with this socialist version of Jesus that does not in any way equate to the real Jesus Christ. It doesn't. It's just, you've actually fictionalized Jesus without actually really reading what he says. And unfortunately, a lot of people on the left are doing this. I have a cousin who went to college and came back super far left and has all these stupid ideas, I'm sorry, but stupid ideas about how Jesus was preaching socialism. He wasn't. So, because forcing people to be charitable by stealing their money legally to pay for entitlement programs is not charity. It's legal theft. And that's not the individual gaining salvation by doing good works and serving God out of the love of their heart. Okay? Charity is not something that's taken from you and given to somebody else. It's not redistribution of wealth. It is a genuine act of kindness on your part towards another person, with good intentions. That is charity. That is love of God. Okay? And that's being forgotten by a lot of leftist Christians. They're deliberately avoiding all that to push a political, social agenda, and it's just, it's wrong. As Americans, we have to believe that George Washington was at least a good person, that he wasn't perfect. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, heck, even Alexander Hamilton. He did some things that I don't agree with, but at the same time, he did some things that were good. So it's like, you have to understand these are all human beings. They had imperfections, but that they also built a bigger tapestry of things that made America the greatest country in the world. So, I'm going to look at guys like Andrew Jackson and see him as kind of like the Hitler of my people. but I'm also going to be, as a fair person as I try to be, I'm going to look at the errors of my own people and say, okay, you shouldn't have burned all these people alive at Fort Mims. They shouldn't have attacked us at Burnt Corn either. But at the same time, you should have listened to Red Eagle and not burned those people alive. You should have taken them captive. And you could have traded them off. And then it could have been looked upon as a military victory and not as a massacre. And that's where we as a people, we as Muskogee people, screwed up. Well, at least the Red Stick portion. And I'm not ripping on modern day Red Sticks at all. I'm just saying that, as a descendant of these same people, I'm going to be fair. We screwed up as a people when we did that. And we were punished for it. So we have to understand that, every nation needs to be humble before God. We all have to do what's right before God if we want to be blessed. And if we make certain mistakes, if we do certain things that are evil, we're going to pay for it. So, and we paid for it as a Muskogee Nation. So, anyways, I'm kind of getting emotional thinking about that because it's pretty terrible stuff all around. So, it doesn't mean that all of our people deserved to suffer what we suffered. There's a lot of bad things that were done to us by the federal forces, and there was no justification for some of the things that had happened. Okay, and that's where America, needs to, and a lot of Americans have come to terms, I think, as a people with the mistakes of the past and said, yeah, this is wrong. Our people shouldn't have done this. We need to accept that and try to heal as a Muskogee Nation and try to, work with our, work with our neighbors, work with these people. Especially if they want to get us back Hickory ground, okay, and get it back from the porch band, because that needs to happen too. Because their sin today is Hickory is what they did to our sacred site. That the leadership has no respect for, and unfortunately, not enough of the people have stepped up. And that means that the Muskogee people of the porch band, there's got to be a reckoning for that. And maybe in the courts. I hope we succeed in the courts. But they will have to stand before God for desecrating these sites and breaking their word, which they very, very obviously did. So, again, I'm mostly aiming this at the leadership. But I also partly blame the people, those who've not spoken up. But I know there's a lot who have spoken up. So, our national legend is going to be something that always evolves and grows. We have our origin legends that are going to define how we got started as a people. And then there's going to be our histories that tell us how we lived, how we continued on, how we built our nation, how it collapsed, how we had to rebuild. And this is the cycle of rebuilding and collapsing and rebuilding, collapsing. And somewhere in between, there's going to be a lot of the history that hopefully survives. And hopefully, hopefully helps, the rebuilding part should also help us, should inspire us. We should always seek to do bigger and better things. And I think as a Muskogee Nation, we'll do something as the American nation will hopefully do so. But as a nation, as an American nation, there's a lot of evil being done right now in this nation. And it's passing through the courts. And we're going to suffer before God because of it if we don't repent and try to fix our ways. So, anyways, those are my thoughts for now. I'm going to get back in the house. I need to find out the location of my appointment. For some reason, I don't have the email or text for that appointment. And I talked to them on the phone. I thought they sent me something, but for some reason, I don't have it in front of me. So, going to give Kaiser a call. So, I wish I could say I'm going to the Okemah Clinic, but I'm not. So, anyways, I'll talk to y'all later. You have a great rest of the day. Happy Friday. Have a good weekend. And, Mado.